I'm going to go by the clock. That's always the latest, so I'm only 3 minutes late, so that's not bad. But I will call us to order, and we will get started. Mr. City Clerk, if you'd like to start with a roll call, please.
Certainly. Councillor Croson.
Here.
Councillor Middleton Hope. I think I heard he's on his way. Councillor Palladino.
Present.
Councillor Parker. Pardon me, Deputy Mayor Parker.
I'm here, but before we start, I just wanted to say something. We are late because some of us had the opportunity and privilege to recognize some Queen's Platinum Jubilee Award recipients, and I want to let you guys know that Councillor Croson was awarded one of the awards today, and she didn't even know about it until like less than a week ago. Am I correct on that? And so she's pretty humble about it, but that's why we're late. And so congratulations, well deserved to all the recipients as well. And we'll talk about more of that at our next council meeting, but I just want to congratulate you. It was an honor to be there.
That was why I had to put this meeting back to 2, but not tell anybody why I had to put the meeting back till 2. So, because I did want to be there, but thank you. All right, we'll go on then to our acknowledgement statement. The City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. Lethbridge is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Moving to the adoption of the agenda, I have a motion from Councillor Palladino that the agenda of the regular meeting of the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee of December 1st, 2022 be adopted as presented. Councillor Palladino.
Thank you. If there are no additions or deletions, I will call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? We adopt that unanimously. Moving now to our consent agenda, which is the minutes from our last meeting in November. I have a motion from Deputy Mayor Parker. Be resolved that the minutes of Civic Works Standing Policy Committee held on November 3rd, 2022 be approved and the Chair and City Clerk designate be authorized to sign the same. Deputy Mayor Parker.
Thank you. And if you have an opportunity to review the minutes, if there's anything that you've seen that shouldn't not be there, I would just call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. Welcome, Councillor Middleton Hope. Where were you? No, just kidding. Yeah, if we could have those buttons that change lights, we would all have been on time. I'm just saying that would have helped. We move on now to our presentations. Our first presentation is by Dr. Kalla, Project Manager of Solace Energy Consulting, RE Energy Trends Solace Energy Consulting. Staff, do we wish to introduce this before we turn over to Dr. Kalla, or are we heading right into the presentation? Okay. So Ms. Parker, we'll hand it over to your team.
Perfect. Thank you. So looking forward to different energy trends, we contracted Solace Energy Consulting to just take a look going forward at what we should keep our minds open for. And I'll pass it over to Maureen.
Wonderful, thank you. So there is the presentation. So I'll just let you know when I need to change slides. So thank you, everybody, and it is my pleasure to be here today. And congratulations on the award. That's very exciting. Today, I really just, I'm here to present some of the work that we completed for Mandy and her team. This work was completed sort of in early 2022. The presentation you see in front of you is really just an executive summary. We did provide Mandy and her team with a more detailed presentation, which if there's interest, I'm sure can be shared with the committee. So my plan today is really to take about 10 minutes to walk through the presentation, but not through every slide, just really to highlight some key slides, because my understanding is you guys have had the exec summary to review in detail. And then that will leave us with about 10 minutes, where I'd love to be able to engage in any questions that you have, anything that you might be further curious about, anything that I can sort of help to clarify in terms of some of these trends that we are really seeing in there. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So just a quick introduction about Solace. Solace is a women-owned enterprise. And there we go, thank you. We've got about 20 plus years of experience within the renewable energy and sustainability sectors. And we pride ourselves in being a trusted partner who provides innovative and comprehensive services to our clients. Next slide. So just quickly on sort of the team that worked on this particular project. So it included myself. I'm the Director of Grid Modernization and ESG with Solus and acted as the project manager for this particular project. We also pulled in Paula as our subject matter expert, as well as our senior reviewer on it. And then Gabe was really our renewable energy analyst who did a lot of our detailed research and sort of pulling together the ideas for us. Next slide. So I had the opportunity to meet with Stu and Mandy back in sort of the fall of 2021 to talk about some of the different things that they were seeing, particularly with sort of some of the changes that were happening with COVID-19, and sort of talking about different opportunities we saw for investing in new business opportunities, looking to sort of generate some ideas from there, as well as how could some of these ideas look to support some of the GHG initiatives that were already underway within the city, and really look to try to position Lethbridge as a leader sort of within the sustainable and clean energy future. In our conversations, we kind of off the bat sort of identified two potential opportunities. And these included sort of an EV charging hub to leverage sort of Lethbridge's position and sort of some of the surrounding transportation routes there, as well as sort of contemplating the opportunity for a generation company, electricity generation company, but really here would be a focus on trying to integrate both electricity and heat. And so in order to kind of dive into whether or not we thought those might be possible, we felt it was really important to kind of begin with understanding some of the trends that we see sort of within transportation, heating, and overall in sort of this increased electrification that was occurring, as well as then sort of identifying some potential funding opportunities that would be in there. And so this presentation that you guys have and the more detailed presentation we provided really goes into depth into this sort of trends analysis. So next slide, please, which will be slide 7. So in order to kick off this work, we first wanted to recognize that the City of Lethbridge has already done a lot of work, and to really look at that work in the context of what is happening on a global stage. And sort of one of the most recognized initiatives globally is the UN Sustainability Development Goals, or the SDG. And so we started by taking goal 11, which is specific to cities, and really looks at how cities can become inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, and looked at the different initiatives that the city is currently doing or has previously done to demonstrate sort of some alignment here and really set the foundation for this trends analysis. And as you can see from here, you know, the City of Lethbridge, you guys are already in many ways leading within this space, and we felt it was important to acknowledge the work that has already been done to date. And so based on this sort of foundation, we really kind of stepped into the sustainable transportation trends. So next slide. So just to kind of give a highlight, there's again, multiple trends within this area that we identified, but I'm going to sort of just focus on one primarily today. But some of those other trends that we really found being driven by, the trends are being driven by primarily consumer changes due to COVID-19, electric vehicle adoption, and integrating real-time data. And so some of those trends from sort of the consumer aspect that were changing was this idea of reducing commutes and this idea of sort of trying to form more like what they term 15-minute cities. On that same angle was this idea of more intelligent mobility and the opportunity to really create planning perspectives by putting sort of the human experience at the center and then building out plans outwards as opposed to what is traditionally sort of done in sort of a reverse direction. So with all of those trends, what I want to focus on today really is just highlighting a little bit more around the EV adoption. So next slide, please, and that will be slide 11. So in earlier 2021, before we kicked off this project with the City of Lethbridge, we had the opportunity to really develop an electric vehicle adoption model. And this was used to kind of get a better understanding of how quickly we could expect EVs to be adopted within Canada and specifically within some provinces based on sort of policy that had been utilized in other jurisdictions and if some of those policies were to be implemented within Canada. And one of the things that I find most impactful by the graph that you have on this slide is one of the comments that we typically get is, well, we don't have very many EVs. Do we need to worry about this? And that's correct. We don't. But one of the things that really kind of became clear within this modeling is that acceleration of adoption is going to happen, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I would say since we've done this modeling, we've seen from the Government of Canada the announcements that sort of by 2035, we're looking to have 100% of sort of passenger vehicles that are being sold will produce no emissions. And so we did update our modeling to align with that. And if anything, we sort of saw this transition now happening a little bit quicker. So what this really means is then there's this opportunity for cities to start to look to improve sort of electric vehicle charging infrastructure, but also to start looking at their own fleets and determining sort of what's their path forward for their own fleet decarbonization. We're pretty confident that on the passenger vehicles, electric vehicles are going to win the day. But when it comes to some of those sort of medium to high duty vehicles or heavy duty vehicles, that's still to be determined. And this is where sort of emerging opportunities like hydrogen or other alternative fuels might also play a role as we move out towards 2030 and beyond. And there are a number of initiatives that I believe you guys are already tied into on the federal level to help sort of support some of these transitions. So next slide, please. So then if we're looking and diving into sort of some of the heating trends that we see, really, again, the purpose for sort of focusing on heating was that building emissions are the third highest in Canada. So first is oil and gas, then comes transportation, and then it's buildings. And within sort of, if you look at those emissions within the buildings, space heating is really sort of the largest component. So next slide, please. And we'll go to slide 14. So within the heating trends, there are a number of things that can be done both short term and near term. And some of them apply to both retrofits and new builds. Obviously, new builds is a little bit easier to deal with than retrofits. But this is something that we're definitely starting to see a greater emphasis on, sort of the idea of more energy efficiency and conservation, and really starting to deal on that retrofit. And so these trends can be obviously as simple as changing out light bulbs, lighting controls, to everything that's a little bit more advanced towards putting in like solar PV on rooftops, along with, sort of an energy storage opportunity there, looking at converting sort of a natural gas heating towards more heat pumps kind of applications. And this really kind of overall building perspective or holistic approach is really being tied in with some of the IoT and automation that we're seeing within this space that's going much more beyond sort of the traditional building automation systems and really more at sort of energy management systems that's allowing sort of for predictive maintenance and sort of diagnostic analysis. And this kind of aligns with sort of some of the upstream trends that we're seeing related to sort of these emerging cleaner energy fuels, which is sort of the next thing I really kind of wanted to highlight. So if you're able to jump to slide 16, please. So one of the big areas that's sort of more nearer term within Alberta is renewable natural gas. Hydrogen is another aspect, but that's, I would say, a little bit further out. So renewable natural gas is really produced from waste products such as animal manure, agriculture waste, and municipal solid waste. And right now it's typically thought to be, the opportunity is really to blend with sort of our natural gas and look as a way to kind of help reduce the energy intensity or the GHG intensity of our current sort of heating resources that we have. And part of the reason I wanted to highlight this one is, one of the projects that is really being kicked off in this area is quite close to home to you guys, which is the Lethbridge biomass. And these guys are really looking at sort of adding this biogas upgrading system to be able to support and send sort of renewable natural gas to Fortis, BC. And then there are 2 other projects within Alberta that are occurring. So next slide, please. So slide 17. So when we think about sort of just the overall electrification trends generally, this is really being driven globally by the desire to decarbonize. And the idea being that in globally, most places have fairly clean electricity systems. And so seen as electricity being sort of that means in which deep decarbonization can occur. So if you can now jump to slide 19, please. So there really are sort of these 4 main pillars when it comes to sort of overall electrification. We've already talked about a couple of these, but really to kind of lay them out, we're talking about sort of the green energy opportunities. So this is really sort of increase in renewable energy, the idea of the smart city, which again has a lot of that building electrification focus. Then we're diving into sort of the overall smart energy with a focus on industrial electrification, but also on sort of the grid and how do we modernize the grid and use the grid more efficiently with more distributed generation kind of coming onto the system and more consumers participating in the electricity system. And then finally around sort of that smart mobility with a really big focus on fleet electrification or fleet decarbonization. And a lot of this is really being driven by a number of net zero initiatives and targets that are out there, but also on sort of the environmental, social, and governance aspects as well. And so this is sort of the new sustainability wording that is used for public companies that exist out there, with a big difference now being that a lot of that reporting is tied to sort of financial reporting as well. So there's a little bit more of a rigor behind it. Okay, and then so if we can go to slide 23, please. So overall, sort of through this work, one of the key messages we saw is that we are seeing sort of some of these major advances in sustainability. And as I was just alluding to, this is really being driven by sort of ESG and some of the financial requirements that public companies will now have to report on the different metrics and targets that they're using. But in order to achieve this sort of sustainability, conservation and energy efficiency are going to be key aspects of this. Overall, throughout the report, we identified a number of different opportunities. So within the detailed report, we provided a number of different case studies that really provided specific examples within sort of these 3 different trends of what different municipalities are doing within these different areas to give you a little bit more concrete ideas of what could happen. I think one of the key messages that came out of here is this idea of increased electrification is actually a really great opportunity in that it will sort of give you the opportunity to create some additional revenue, which then allows opportunities sort of for some future programs. With that being said, we are undergoing a pretty fundamental transition and transformation in some ways. And so these significant changes will require significant investment, but we were able to identify a number of different funding opportunities that exist out there. And so part of the messaging as well is to make sure that those opportunities are being leveraged in a way that can ensure that any programs that are put in place sort of allow for sort of sustainable revenue streams, both on the CapEx side, but also sort of on the OpEx side. So I'm going to stop there. I think I'm close to my 10-minute mark, and I'm happy to take any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm going to assume, since I see only city staff in the audience, that I don't have any members of the public who wish to speak on this. I think that's a safe assumption. So we will then go to questions from committee, if there are any questions. All right, I have a question about heat pumps, and maybe you can help me. There is a concern that I hear often that heat pumps work great, except in really cold temperatures like ours. What is the new information on heat pumps? Are they something now suitable for places like Lethbridge, or are they more for southern locales?
So that's a great question, and it was something that Stu sort of asked us about as well. And so within the detailed presentation, we do sort of provide a response to there. And so the simple answer is yes. They will work effectively sort of above temperatures about -15. Below -15, this is typically where some of those efficiencies drop. And so you can typically require sort of have a need for sort of a dual fuel pump or more of a hybrid system. And so I recognize obviously Lethbridge will get temperatures sort of below that -15 range. But I would say that they are an opportunity. They are a possibility. You will just have to keep sort of some of that efficiency in mind as you're designing them.
Thank you. One of the things I have a passion for is historic buildings, and you've talked a bit about retrofits and, as we call it, adaptive reuse. How are we seeing buildings, historic buildings that are adapting to some of this? Are you seeing that being an effective way that they're moving forward? Can we make a historic building an environmentally friendly building at the same time?
That is a great question, and I'm not going to have a great answer for you, unfortunately. Part of this research did not dive into historic buildings, so I don't have any sort of specific examples that I can pull on for you that would have looked at that scenario.
Okay. Thank you. Maybe some future research. I see online
Absolutely.
We have Councillor Campbell with a question.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I don't think my camera's working, but anyway, the question, hydrogen, talk about hydrogen. I just wonder, as you look in your crystal ball, how far out are we with hydrogen, and where are we going to get it from in southern Alberta? Are there places that we can make use of it? I know yeah. the provincial government has a big push on for hydrogen.
They do, and I would say not just the provincial government, but many governments, both here in Canada and globally as well. So hydrogen, I would say, is an emerging area that still has a lot of things to be sorted out. So I don't see this sort of happening in the next couple of years. And so when we think about hydrogen, we have to sort of think about it from the generation side. Within Alberta, one of the things we're really fortunate about is we have been generating hydrogen, or producing hydrogen is maybe the more appropriate term, for years to be used sort of within our industrial processes. This current hydrogen is being produced sort of from a natural gas source, but there is opportunity to tack along some carbon capture onto the back of those facilities to look to sort of reduce the carbon intensity of that hydrogen and have that as a potential opportunity. When we think about hydrogen that's being produced more on an electrolysis side from, say, renewable energy, that's further out. Again, because some of the costs associated with that still would need to come down for that to be economic in an Alberta context. It may make sense in other jurisdictions, I would say, before it would make sense in Alberta. Then there's the question of, okay, so if we're producing hydrogen in sort of more central locations, how do you then transport it to places like Lethbridge for it to be distributed? Short distances, you can, they're looking at doing that, blending it with natural gas and utilizing sort of existing pipelines. But hydrogen reacts different in pipelines. And so that definitely needs to be sort of a consideration that needs to be looked at. For longer distances, you can convert it to other forms such as ammonia and then convert it back. So that transportation piece is definitely still a piece to be figured out. And then it's sort of the use side of it and sort of what's the intended use for it and the distribution. So there's a lot of work being done on the hydrogen side, but I don't think we'll see sort of anything immediate within the next couple of years. It's going to take a little bit more time to develop than some of these other trends underway.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations. I did not know, so that's exciting news. Thank you for the information and presentation on the trends that we're seeing. My question, I think, is through you, Madam Chair, to our administration. Council approved the Energy Conservation Master Plan, I believe it was called, and there's an implementation plan in there. and this work is to support that. Are there any decisions needed to be made by council going forward, or is this just to sort of update us on how things are going and where we're focusing?
That one. For the Energy Conservation Master Plan, that we actually have an update, not the next item on the agenda, but the following one. There are some things that we could talk about that. We're in a good place and we're moving forward, and I think we're doing great. It aligns with the trends that Maureen talked about, and yeah, it's going well.
Thank you for that. Also, I closed the presentation, but I think in the last couple of slides, it talked about, I think it was in the next steps, I'm just dredging from memory, I think it said, ensure the fund is self-sustaining. Now, is this the Clean Energy Improvement Program for residential, or I wasn't sure which program was intended to be self-sustaining. I think it said through reinvestment.
Yes, so I think that was on the next step slide, the last one. Yes, so that particular comment was directed at the Clean Energy Improvement Program, and so one of the things that we had seen within our research is we'd identified that you guys had put this bylaw and approved the bylaw already, but sort of looking at how some of the other jurisdictions had put together some of these funds, that was a component that they made sure was included in the design of it. To ensure that there was sort of funds coming through that program that would allow it to continue without having to have additional or other government funds, or other provincial or federal, to keep the program moving forward.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes,
Yeah.
I just wasn't sure if it was directed specifically to that one, so thank you. And final question, if I can, Madam Chair. I think one of the things that's the recommendations or next steps is to review other municipalities, see what they're doing, and follow step. I'd rather be more on the leading edge and have other municipalities looking to us. Are there any bold recommendations? You'd say if you guys want to achieve your targets quicker, faster, better, and have every other municipality come to you and say, how did you do this, rather than us waiting till they figure it out, which is cheaper. Are there any bold recommendations?
Wow. Now that is a can of worms that, that can be open. So so that point about looking to other municipalities was sort of municipalities that we saw leading in this space that were of similar size. So Fort Collins was one of the ones that came out of that. And if I look at sort of some of the things that they were doing, so I'm first going to say I come from an innovation background, so please take that as my response here. There has to be a balance between willingness to try new things that aren't fully proven, that may fail, and take those learnings from that failure and move forward, as opposed to seeing those learnings as a crap, we moved too fast, right? And that is not always an easy thing to do when you're working with taxpayer dollars, right? Because there has to be a level of accountability. So there has to be a level of willingness to kind of take a bit of a risk within still an appropriate manner. And that's a hard balance to strive. The other things I would say that, you know, we've seen within other jurisdiction, and this was sort of one of the points that we talked about in next steps, is really ensuring that there's alignment within the different groups within the city, because I think it can be really easy to have silos, right, and unaware of sort of what's happening within those different divisions. And so how can you ensure that everybody's kind of working towards that common goal, so that way you're not sort of getting one program in one place that is actually kind of counteractive to something else that's happening somewhere else. So I wouldn't say there's one single bold thing that you can do. It's much more about the mindset that you're going to have, and the ability to keep moving forward even as things may not work as you expect them to the first time.
No magic bullet.
No magic bullet. No, and I
Thank
think that's what's really interesting and exciting and terrifying with this transition that's underway is we can't say it's just going to be this or it's going to be that, right? And so it creates room for lots of opportunity, but it also creates difficulty for you guys in deciding what that next opportunity should be.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Palladino?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Calla, for your presentation. It appears to me that the culprit on the transportation side is planes, trains, and automobiles. And in your report somewhere, and I can't find it right now, but you did mention about a 15-minute city. I've always assumed Lethbridge was a 15-minute city. Are we?
Oh, I feel like I should leave that up to Stu to answer.
I would qualify
'Cause
that.
I've only spent a little bit of time in Lethbridge.
So I think Maureen's slide on that note talks about walking and cycling within 15 minutes of your home. You would be able to access all the urban things that one needs to live their life. And so I think, although in many cases that is possible in Lethbridge, having moved here 20 years ago, I still can't buy a pair of pants in West Lethbridge. So there's something out there, right? So,
Yeah.
so there's those elements of planning are important.
And it really ties into that active transportation or ability to be more active. So that's where that sort of cycling and walking within sort of that 15-minute to be able to get all the amenities that you're looking for, or at least the majority of amenities that you would need.
So my thoughts of being able to drive anywhere in the city within 15 minutes, that's not what you meant.
No.
Okay,
No, we're
thanks.
really starting to see that trend of less driving and more active participation.
Okay,
Or
thank you.
active, sorry, not participation, active transportation.
Councillor Middleton Hope?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is directed at administration. Perhaps Ms. Parker can help us out with this. So this is all part of the Energy Conservation Master Plan, and we're looking at multiple options, not just solar, not just wind. We're looking at nuclear. We're looking at upgrading our electric system. There's a whole host of pieces that are really moving here. Are there decisions that are going to be that you're going to ask council to make, some decisions that you're going to ask council to make in advance of the next opening of the CIP project, for example?
I'm not too sure if there'd be anything before the next CIP. We did actively get a lot of projects within the CIP that we're currently working in. There could potentially be something additional that would come up that would be a CIP ask, but nothing that we're aware of at the moment.
Right. What we're looking at here is whether it's solar, whether it's nuclear, whether it's electric upgrades and so forth. We're talking about substantial dollars to invest in technology that is going to assist us to move in a transitional period to perhaps the 30s or 40s. Is that what we're looking at?
So an example of that is, beyond the electric utility who has their own CIP and has to have a window of where are things going? How much money do we have to invest capitally? And I see Jason Drenth online. He may want to have independent comment on that. But a good example of what we've been talking about here is the electrification of the transit fleet. If one looks at the past CIP, there's a CIP in there for that first step. I think it's referred to as a pilot.
Right.
But again, it's not clear yet whether will that be battery, will it be hydrogen, will it be something in between, and likely we'll start down a path and technology will evolve and we'll have to be nimble to go through. But I believe that council has provided the correct amount of funding for us to step in on some of these issues, another one being car charging. I'm just giving you the projects that they've put on my plate since I came out of fiber optics, just to give you a feel for where we're heading. So 22 car chargers will be installed by the end of next spring at various city locations, NMAX, City Hall, the Park and Ride facility, and at the Nikkei Yuko Japanese Gardens, so that citizens start to see this and how will they employ it. It is a pilot. If we build it, do they come? Not unlike fiber optics was. So we're putting that infrastructure into place so that it's there, knowing though that there is very serious private money coming into those spaces as well, and expect to see that ongoing over time. But it's not there today, and I think that's the municipality creating, first of all, the visibility for this so that citizens have the ability to start moving forward.
Thank you for that. I think that's a very fulsome response, and that helps. There is a challenge out there that is ongoing and continuing, and if we're talking about vehicles in general, the production and the distribution of vehicles is a significant challenge and will continue to be a significant challenge for a number of years to come, which will impact our ability to even access these vehicles. So we need to perhaps keep that in mind when we're creating this infrastructure in anticipation that there are going to be all these electric vehicles on the road. We may not see those for a number of years yet because they just simply can't produce them.
Or scarcities in mining may drive hydrogen forward quicker than what anyone expects today, because that may be a more, a more palatable way to move things forward. So, yeah, if you dive in with both feet, you'll have it wrong. We've done that before. So we just have to inch in with these pilots and see where technology takes us.
Thank you.
I believe Mr. Sanchez also wants to comment on that question.
So a little bit is talking about the CAP. I know that question has been asked a couple of times, and it's interesting. This morning I was talking to Mrs. Parker about we have other projects in the Energy Conservation Master Plan and even in the landfill that are there is a probability to generate revenue, carbon offsets, carbon credits, etc. And we were chatting that that's another opportunity to collect that revenue into an account that we can always come back to council and say, listen, we have now, I don't know, $500,000, and this will allow us to do an amendment to the CAP or bring one of those ideas that we can present to council and get the approval to go ahead and actually use that money that we're saving to do more work. So again, we're in that stage that we're learning, but we're trying to be as proactive as we can, and even talking to other municipalities, because some of them, they have been doing this capture, carbon credit capture for a few years, how we can leverage that knowledge to move forward and bring new ideas to the table.
So for us, this is for information, right? For council, it's information. But how will administration use this information moving ahead? So where do you see your next steps? I know we have here, working with departments to encourage alignment. How will you use this particular information to make a better choice of moving ahead?
Well, what I kind of felt like when we had this energy trends and aligned it with what we were doing, we were on the right path. It's just developing it, seeing what other new technologies come online, and just be ready for the ability to move forward with whatever that might be.
Nice to know we're on the right trend, and I believe Mr. Sanchez said we are down 18% we've reduced emissions and everything 18% in the city. That's the report in the submission, I believe.
12.5%.
12.5. Okay, I was a little optimistic, and we only said you're going to get to 40. So being on the right trend is a perfect thing. Thank you. I don't see any other questions from anyone. So thank you to everyone for the presentation. I have a motion from Councillor Middleton Hope. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommends that Council receive for information the Solus Energy Consulting Executive Summary Presentation on Sustainable Transportation, Heating and Electrification Trends. Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we've had a really fulsome discussion and presentation on where we're headed with this. I know that we're going to have several more conversations over the course of the next 3 years of our term, so I look forward to them, and I'm prepared to call the question, Madam.
Question's been called. All in favor? Excellent. We all will unanimously receive information. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Kola.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Moving now to our second presentation. Mr. Andrew Malcolm will be introducing this. Andrew Malcolm, of course, is our Urban Revitalization Manager, and we have Alberto de Salvatierra, University of Calgary School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape. So, Mr. Malcolm, we'll leave you to introduce this.
Very much, and congratulations, Councillor Crowson, on your award. So today I am joined with Alberto de Salvatierra, who is the Assistant Professor of Urbanism and Data in Architecture at the University of Calgary School of Architecture, Planning and Landscape Architecture. And we are here today to share with SPC some exciting work known as the Civic Commons Catalyst, which we've recently completed through a partnership with the University of Calgary, with full funding being provided through the Alberta Real Estate Foundation. The Civic Common Catalyst is an interdisciplinary research and innovation platform that takes aim at underutilized spatial assets in our community to identify areas of opportunity, to catalyze them into positive assets through focused strategies for economic development and impact investment. I'd like to highlight that this project doesn't have any formal connection to our Civic Common master plan, and just a similar name. Phase 1 of the Civic Common Catalyst began with the City of Calgary in 2020, and then the City of Lethbridge was fortunate to come on board as part of Phase 2 along with Okotoks and Medicine Hat. I'd like to quickly acknowledge my colleagues in Opportunity Lethbridge, Planning and Design, and IT Services who have, along with our partners at Economic Development Lethbridge, contributed time, data, and expertise to ensure this project was a success. And then give kudos to Alberto and his team at the University of Calgary. We've been incredibly blown away by the ability of their area to do data analytics and policy evaluation, and I will turn it over to Alberto to share all that his team has been up to.
Thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. Will I see the slides come up? Fantastic. So, councillors, thank you again for the opportunity to present to you today. It is my pleasure to share with you the Civic Commons Catalyst initiative dealing with supporting transformative revitalization of underutilized spatial assets in Albertan cities. Next slide, please. As Andrew mentioned, this project has been made possible through the generous support of the Alberta Real Estate Foundation. Next slide, please. So as Andrew mentioned, the Civic Commons Catalyst aims to take underutilized spatial assets in cities and catalyze them into positive assets that can revitalize their communities. By identifying these zones of opportunity, assets can be networked together and help focus strategies for economic development and impact investment. The way that we've gone through this process and this project is through an interdisciplinary sort of framework that incorporates a variety of different research methodologies and topic areas in order to provide a really holistic and comprehensive synthesis from a variety of perspectives simultaneously. I also, as part of the findings, we have done an analysis on various horizon trends, some of which that Dr. Kola mentioned are actually also part and included within our findings. Next. So as part of this work, we began through the collection of various geospatial data sets, of which Andrew Malcolm, Logan Bartholomew, and their team generously provided to us. We also produced a variety of data sets ourselves. These are all being returned back to the City of Lethbridge in addition to the ones that we produced ourselves. Here we have sort of a few of the various synthesized data visualizations that we prepared for the City of Lethbridge that begin to analyze various aspects of the built urban environment and how these can be leveraged to secure and facilitate additional investment in the public realm, and coordinating, again, all these various assets to provide new opportunities for the City of Lethbridge. This map here is showing the location of various parking lots in the city and how that might sort of interface with existing urban transportation corridors, the flooding of the river, and then other sort of environmental considerations as that might be emergent, such as sort of sound and noise pollution from the airport. Next slide, please. As part of our work, we documented every single building within the City of Lethbridge and classified it into one of 13 different programmatic urban categories in order to understand the productive sort of adjacencies between different types of buildings and the sort of services that are offered within. So here we have a map of the various urban attractors present within the City of Lethbridge, and you can begin to see that there are various clusterings and areas of sort of increased activity, and then there are areas that perhaps don't have that sort of density of various programs, such as restaurants, cafes, bars, etc. Next slide, please. Here we also looked at various sort of ecological systems and the distribution of green spaces and parks and plazas in order to understand what are the opportunities for connecting some of these more disjointed networks to, again, provide a more sort of holistic and connected sort of urban environment that can provide additional opportunities for active transportation and pedestrian accessibility. Next slide, please. So following from our work with geospatial data, we also produced a digital twin of the city of Lethbridge. So this is a three-dimensional model, next slide please, that incorporates and analyzes every single building, as I mentioned. So one of the previous geospatial data visualizations sort of showed the kind of the point data version of this three-dimensional model. So we kind of built this from scratch, mapped all the various buildings. Some of them have multiple categories. For example, an art gallery could be considered both a cultural amenity but also a commercial one. So these are just some of the screenshots from that three-dimensional model that we're also providing to the city of Lethbridge as an additional resource to continue some of this work. Next slide, please. Here we have just a few more of those images, again, showing our work with this digital twin. Next slide, please. Another image here. Next slide, please. So in addition to the geospatial data production and the building of a three-dimensional model, a digital twin of the city of Lethbridge, we also collected and assembled a catalog of all underutilized spatial assets within the city of Lethbridge. These are highlighted here in purple. And what are these underutilized spatial assets? These can include items such as vacant buildings, vacant floors within buildings or vacant units within buildings that have various units, vacant lots or empty plots of land, and often sometimes elements of public civic infrastructure, which might include things like parking lots where appropriate. Next slide, please. Here we just have a few more of those axonometrics showing the various distribution of those underutilized spatial assets to, again, help understand where these properties are located and therefore enable the production of strategies for tackling the adaptive reuse and the sort of reconfiguration of some of these assets. Next slide, please. Here's the sort of the third axonometric showing aspects of that catalog. Next slide, please. So finally, in conjunction with the geospatial data, the digital twin, the catalog production, we also conducted a public policy audit and analysis of all the sort of relevant public policy documents for the city of Lethbridge in order to understand a few productive synergies. We have previously done work around horizon scanning trends using a modified STEEP framework. So looking at social, technological, economic, environmental, and political, or in our case, planning or for urban design, modified STEEP framework, and using our sort of horizon signals and trends work, combining with our work in finance innovation to understand how other municipalities have sort of funded similar projects, what financial tools are they deploying, and sort of cross-pollinating that with public policy, and how are different documents, statutory or non-statutory, helping to facilitate and provide additional opportunities sort of enmeshed with these various other considerations. Because when you begin to consider all these things simultaneously, some things begin to emerge and some trajectories forward also begin to materialize. Next slide, please. So as part of this public policy review that also synthesized and cross-pollinated with the aforementioned areas, the horizon scanning and our finance innovation work, this resulted in a number of specific findings that have been provided to the city administration to review, and those findings were turned into a list of strategic opportunities by the Civic Commons Catalyst team. These are organized in 6 categories, which I'll be sharing shortly. Those are local economy, arts, culture, heritage, and recreation, community well-being, housing and development, transportation and infrastructure, and environment and ecology. Next slide, please. So for local economy, some of the opportunities that we identified where we could encourage more BIAs to form and become integrated with each other to maximize economic capabilities of the region. Knowledge-based industries could be incentivized to grow and aid in a new working model that incorporates working from home. We could encourage the creation of workspaces to allow flexible and dynamic work environments. We can encourage employers to consider shorter, flexible leases. encourage opportunities to further diversify the local economy to improve economic stability. We could consider the strengthening of tourism as a combination of holistic development and branding opportunities, encouraging the adaptive reuse of underutilized lots and heritage buildings to support commercial uses. We can encourage the creation of infrastructure to support tech-based trends. For example, educational programs in tech complemented with a smart city strategy. And I believe Dr. Kola mentioned some of these things as well. We could encourage blended work models with people starting to work from home, potentially subsidizing independent or local businesses to sustain growth. Currently, minimum parking requirements can result in an oversupply of parking spaces. So these underutilized spatial assets could be utilized by converting parts of parking lots into other economically beneficial land uses, which is also a type of project that we've been looking at and developing with the City of Calgary. Next slide, please. For arts, culture, heritage, and recreation, some of the opportunities that we identified are encouraging neighborhoods to create vibrant cultural hubs that can better promote a sense of community through events, festivals, education, and involvement. Encourage flexible streets that could be anchored by art, history, and culture. And we consider more strongly preserving Indigenous and other historical resources. Next slide, please. For community well-being, we could encourage inclusivity and respect for different social groups by organizing events and festivals to celebrate them. We could potentially facilitate the bureaucracy, permission, and grants for events and festivals for social groups. So this might perhaps need a reevaluation of certain policies that could include rethinking ways in which streets, old buildings, parking lots could be used for such events. We can encourage aging in place and provide design solutions that integrate transportation, accessibility, proximity to hospitals, commercial areas, etc. Encourage the support of unhoused population of the city, encourage the understanding that the land originally belonged to the Indigenous community, and involving them as important stakeholders in development conversations, encourage further engagement with First Nation communities, and transparency in the process of engagement could be strengthened with people, communities from varying socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds. Next slide, please. For housing and development, aging buildings can be adaptively reused not only for residential use, but also for commercial or cultural purposes. We can encourage the development of missing middle housing types, consider the land use designation changes in areas that can accommodate more density, public spaces, innovation districts, cultural typologies, mixed-use spaces. These could all be the focus in the diversification of the social and urban fabric of the city. Affordability is also a huge issue and has led to an increase in homelessness. So perhaps, while the community plan to prevent and then homelessness is a step in the right direction, some of these measures and strategies could be adopted as part of the policy documents. Students also find it hard to get accommodations on campus housing as it's only able to accommodate a small percentage of students. So encouraging development opportunities of affordable housing options for students in and around campuses would have a tremendous economic impact. Compact development and its benefits, right? We can incorporate such initiatives and encourage more of the same to understand resident needs. Next slide, please. For transportation and infrastructure, we could monitor new trends in transportation from a sustainability context, which is down so that it's exactly what happened in the previous presentation. For example, start phasing out gas-run public transportation in favor of an electric fleet of buses. To increase ridership, could find options to market transit, right? For example, a free transit ride for 1 day each month, or making particular bus routes free on days of events. As work culture moves towards work from home, how can we find a middle ground between daily and monthly parking passes from an affordability perspective, for example? We could also relook at how the city is designed from a mobility perspective, right? Or look at how these major intersections might be designed to calm traffic and make experience for cyclists and pedestrians safe and easy to navigate. We could incentivize different types of technologies like market backyard composters. The city currently sells them for $48, right? So rethinking ways in which community-wide composting could accommodate for medium high density neighborhoods that might not have private backyards or private open space. And we could evaluate the recycling unit capacity and start building new facilities, keeping in mind future population growth. Next slide, please. And for environment and ecology, in the face of climate change and unpredictable weather events, looking into sustainable practices in agriculture, encouraging the use of aquaponics, hydroponics, and urban agriculture within city limits to create additional jobs. There's actually a key one to consider in the kind of larger global trends for localizing supply chains. We can encourage food forests, we could divert organic waste for composting to be used in farming, encourage Dodge's native plant palette for grasslands and wetlands, encourage renewable energy and sustainable practices. Again, the previous presentation, I think, speaks to some of these. Encourage recycling items, create green corridors around the river for the movement of wildlife, encouraging moving towards medium high density mixed use approach. The city could also provide grants and incentivize installation of solar panels for homeowners for more communities. Currently, there is specific rebates for the Sunridge Built Green homeowner rebate program, but it's only for homebuyers in Sunridge development. So maybe extending that to other homebuyers, homeowners would be advantageous. Next slide, please. So in some of the next steps, data mappings and diagrams and visualizations, findings, and strategic opportunities have been supplied to city administration. The Civic Commons Catalyst team and city administration are in discussions around how this work can be furthered and exploring opportunities for additional contractor work. Next slide, please. And I believe I still have maybe 1 more minute. So next slide, please. I just wanted to go over and maybe share some additional images of the work that we've done with the City of Calgary. So as part of phase 2 with the work of City of Calgary, we began with them with a similar process that we did with the City of Lethbridge. We have now progressed into kind of creating and crafting various project briefs, these sort of frameworks for the elaboration of different projects and how these can come to fruition with industry support and through the leadership by the city. So this one is parking plasticity, looking at parking lots and how these could be kind of temporarily redeployed to provide additional amenities to the city. Next slide, please. Here we have an ag-tech district looking at office to hydroponic and edge data center conversions to again facilitate a new type of sort of industry within the city of Calgary. Next slide, please. Crypto course looking at blockchain technology and sort of smart city strategy to kind of augment and facilitate looking at these technologies. Next slide, please. EcoPunk Enterprise, again, looking at other ways to rehabilitate the urban realm with other ecological and environmental sort of services that are complemented by like a recycling facility or other energy projects. Next slide, please. Halcyon Hub, looking at a sort of a larger infrastructural regional transportation network, like the Transpod Hyperloop project connecting Edmonton with Calgary. Next slide, please. And finally, Rainbow Ramblas, looking at the development of laneways and alleyways into the new pedestrian sort of network that can provide additional support for small businesses, restaurants, bars, and nightlife. And if you can move forward 2 slides. And just briefly, actually go back 1 slide, sorry. We've also, in our work with the City of Medicine Hat, through a course that was sort of executed this past summer, we also worked to reimagine the North Railway District and the findings and opportunities. Next slide, please. You can just scroll through these and just maybe 1 every 2 seconds. These sort of proposals were sort of developed based off of the data and the various sort of insights that we had gathered from the City of Medicine Hat and created proposals that were presented to the City Council and the Mayor, and now they're taking these forward in order to begin to try and kind of tailor development in a particular direction to facilitate, you know, some of these proposals coming to life. Again, that are incorporating the data, the geospatial analysis, the public policy analysis, the finance innovation analysis, the horizon scanning trends, et cetera, combined and brought to bear into proposals for the city. So that is my time. Thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And again, I don't see any members of the public who are here. If there's any who want to run in and ask questions, they can quickly do so. If not, we will turn to questions from committee or from council members online. Okay, Councillor Palladino, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have 1 question. I don't know who can answer it, but in the study, and by the way, thank you for the report. It's thorough, and I love the graphics that are involved. You talk about converting parts of parking lots into other economically beneficial land uses. I'm looking for the logic and any examples.
Absolutely, that's an excellent question. Could I take that?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So, Councilor Palladino, one of the pilot projects that we're exploring with the City of Calgary that involves Reef Technologies, the owner of InPark, one of the largest parking lot owners within the City of Calgary, is looking at, given that usage of parking lots has not recuperated to pre-pandemic levels, what are other temporary or permanent uses for these parking lots that are basically large open areas of space within the middle of the city? Things that we've looked at are opportunities to create things like farmers markets, night markets, areas for festivals. Some of the pilot projects that Reef Technologies has undertaken in other cities like Vancouver include staging for ghost kitchens, to provide additional business frontage for businesses that might not have a physical location but still want to participate within the economy through different sort of apps like Skip Dishes. Also during the pandemic, there were things like kind of remote or roving clinics that would temporarily install themselves within parking lots. So there's a variety of economic opportunities latent within parking lots that if they're not being fully utilized, then that is space that could be deployed to provide additional amenities for citizens that could contribute to a larger sort of strategy around providing more space for people.
You're not talking about permanently dissolving these parking lots?
No. I mean,
Temporary.
everybody needs their parking. Everybody needs their parking, right? And I think there are opportunities for both temporary and in some cases, perhaps more permanent sort of utilizations of the space. But this is not sort of a tabular sort of kind of rasa thing where it's like all parking lots are going away, right? Through our data, we're able to sort of analyze and understand where all these kind of productive adjacencies are, and if there are underperforming assets, such as a parking lot, that perhaps could be better utilized as a different sort of space, that is a conversation that could be had. But in general, for the parking lot portion, we're looking at sort of temporary kind of adaptive reuse of these spaces.
Thank you. I suppose if it was located in an area where land was valuable, a developer could incorporate new parking into a project and have the land to build his building on. So that's good. Thank you.
I should tell you, Councilor Palladino, I have publicly said that I look forward to the day when there are so few parking lots, we historically designate one. Because that would be my dream, to have no parking lots eventually. So they may not say it, but I will. And my question actually follows up on that. Minimum parking requirements is a bugaboo that many communities have. Do we have good examples of communities that have done away with minimum parking requirements and have had good success with that?
So that's an excellent question. I think, the ways in which programs like these become successful is when sort of joined together with other strategies. What does that mean? If a municipality, for example, were to reduce the availability of parking, but increase the availability of public transportation, perhaps incentives, or kind of reduce cost rate for relevant populations to use such public transportation, then the reduce of parking area is not gonna impact the overall functioning of the city, right? Because we're kind of when you push a lever this way, you pull another lever this way, and therefore that balances out, and therefore you kind of free up additional space. As Councilor Palladino mentioned, that could be used for something else. There's also strategies where maybe you aggregate a bunch of surface parking lots into one parkade, right? And therefore now you have more space. So I think when one begins to think about various strategies in tandem, other opportunities begin to arise as both practical and economically advantageous.
Okay. So, Mr. Malcolm, I'll ask you this question. One of the things that this is, it's information for council, but administration is going to use this to improve processes, operations, and policies. We did something around parking last year with the parklets. Do we have feedback on that? Did they pay more than the parking would have paid? What was the feedback on the parklets, which did use parking for a season, taking it away?
If I may kind of roundabout answer. So I think one thing to note is how we intend on using this information. So for you, we just want to share that we undertook this project. We undergot a whole bunch of data and evaluation for essentially free, thanks to the University of Calgary and the Real Estate Foundation. So we wanted to share that aspect. But also that we do intend to share this information throughout administration to be utilized as everyone kind of takes on new projects. So with planning and design, for example, we would share this evaluation with them as they undertake their land use bylaw review, and a comment like reviewing parking minimums or maximums would be something that would be now informed by this research. In terms of how we would also take this is to inform maybe smaller projects that we undertake. And now, of course, the parklet movement we undertook maybe ahead of the information that we received through this report, but it certainly is now backed up by it. And we saw a great deal of success. Unfortunately, in Lethbridge, I think with our effort, we weren't maybe as sophisticated to do baseline data and to understand what the financial impact was. But there has been a number of reports and studies out of larger centers like Toronto who have indicated that the economic impact of parklets was to the magnitude of 150 times more than what you would have got from someone paying for their daily parking from that space. And that's in terms of, you might have got $10 from that space being used for a car for the day, and instead it saw 8 people sitting every hour for 12 hours buying food and spending time. So those are the types of things that we would look to specifically in a downtown or more urban context as to looking at more economically productive uses of space.
The other thing, you said you're going to share this information with administration. When I look at some of the information on knowledge-based industries and tourism conversations, will we be sharing it with our partners as well? Because I think the Chamber, EDL, Tourism Lethbridge would love to have some of this information.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of them were partners in this process, so we would be very happy and willing to share that with them and hope that it informs their work as well.
Councillor Palladino, are you in the queue yet, or did I just not advance it? Okay, perfect, thank you. Okay, Councillor Campbell, you have a question?
Oh, just a quick one. Thanks for the presentation. I remember a while ago there was sort of an attempt to developing back alleys in the downtown core. Is that something that's in your purview at all? Is that something that has been done that you have ever seen?
Oh, absolutely. I think the most successful example is the Melbourne laneways. These were a series of sort of dead end, like small streets where there was drug use, sort of trash and waste. These are really underutilized spaces within the city. Melbourne decided to simply rehabilitate and open up the buildings to face the laneways, to create openings. And those have now been inhabited by bars, restaurants, a variety of small businesses. And now these Melbourne laneways are actually some of the most kind of economically active and productive areas within downtown Melbourne. So I think that's one of the really key examples that cities often sort of refer to in attempts to kind of revitalize and approach new uses for existing space.
In your research, would you say that there's something that could happen in the Lethbridge downtown?
Absolutely. I think, given projected population trends for the city of Lethbridge, while also combining those 4 global kind of migratory trends for Canada, we can sort of anticipate that there's going to be a variety of opportunities to intake and support additional population. So with these added densities, and as other people sort of seek to move to places that are going to experience climate change to a lesser degree, and Canada being one of those countries because of our kind of geographic sort of position within the globe, those sorts of like expected densities and growth in population would support sort of kind of a transformation like this one. Of course, one would have to begin kind of incrementally, right? Begin looking at one sort of transit within City of Lethbridge, and then sort of continuously add other types of amenities, right? Building additional housing, then more businesses move in, right? And maybe then rehabilitate an additional laneway, build more housing, right? So it's sort of a not just like you build it and then it's done, right? It's sort of like a kind of a layered phased approach that would kind of build on itself.
Thank you.
Councillor
Sure.
Campbell, if I can just add that back in the early 2000s or mid 2010s, there was an effort or an idea that we could have kind of shops opening off the lanes. And I think what we saw was due to different economic conditions in Lethbridge, there wasn't the demand. We were dealing with vacancies on the main street, so to think we would maybe fill off the lane was maybe a little bit presumptuous. However, we've changed our focus, and we've, through our partnership with Public Art, have installed a number of murals that are on the laneways, and the laneways have taken on a little bit of a different function in terms of an art walk, something a little bit brighter and more, inviting. And so we're starting to kind of explore that use of the laneways, and then hopefully we come full circle and we're at a point where vacancy on the main street's low enough that people are looking for that, and then the laneways are already bright and inviting, and we can see that economic investment.
Great, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, and congratulations as well. I didn't get a chance. Congratulations to you as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What I like about so much of this, I think, is I see a lot of things we're already working on, and so it does provide the research for things that we are working towards. But we'll move now. There's no one else in the queue, so we'll move now to the motion. I have a motion from Councillor Palladino. Civic Common Catalyst Research Project, be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee receive the Civic Commons Catalyst presentation as information. Councillor Palladino. Oh.
Which is why I'm standing and getting ready to leave.
Oh, yes, yes. Councillor Carlson.
Sorry, Madam Chair, my hand wasn't waving loudly enough. Just a quick question. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm and Mr. De Salvatierra, for the information and presentation. Just around, what was it called? Agroforests. Because a lot of the presentation dealt with underutilized spaces. So it's not like a greenfield development, which we have done. I believe we put in some urban forestry or agricultural forest, edible orchards, we call them. Can you explain a bit more? Because I've seen other communities that have gone, I guess I'll say whole hog, and they have planted entire edible parklands. and is that what we're talking about here, or is the edible orchards just part of it, or maybe explain a bit more of that? Because we do have some, I believe down around, in our downtown core, we even have pear trees. But most of our forestry is ornamental. And so maybe if you could just explore that a bit more with me, if you don't mind.
Absolutely, Councillor. Thank you for your question. Recalling to your previous question to Dr. Kala around a bold idea, right? When we refer to agroforestry, we're really kind of referring to a suite of ideas, one of which would be orchards, right? Maybe supplanting ornamental trees with productive trees that can provide fruits and other types of foodstuffs for the general populace. But I think the area where there's most space to be sort of gained is within domestic residential lawns. Lawns, for the large part, are kind of dead spaces. They offer no sort of ecological sort of productivity other than, again, just an ornamental sort of green surface. So, legislating or perhaps incentivizing the development of green lawns into sort of forested areas would go a long way to contributing to food security. It would enable an increased canopy for the city. It would facilitate additional wildlife, safe sanctuaries for bees. So there's a number of productive kind of catalysts that can occur as just simply instead of having a lawn, having a planted sort of agroforestry kind of lawn, kind of wild grasses, right? Flowers, trees. These are things I think that will also go a long way to, again, mitigate the urban heat island effect, right? So again, greenhouse gas emissions, all these things would sort of facilitate and come from just one of these interventions, for example.
Well, thank you for that. I remember, I think it was the city of Victoria. One of my pet peeves is our addiction to emerald green manicured lawns. And I think it was the city of Victoria started a program called Go for the Gold, where they encourage everyone to let their lawns die and go dormant and turn gold during the hot winter months, because they don't die, they come right back to life once the rains hit. So that was intriguing. And I hope I'm not delving into pecuniary interest here, because over the last 5 years, I've been digging up my front yard and planting vegetables. Are there any communities that have incentivized that? I see some properties throughout the city are moving towards that. I think it was Old Man Watershed Council, I think, was one of the ones pushing for more urban agriculture like that. Are there any examples of communities that have incentivized people to do away with their lawns and start growing potatoes? And I'm saying potatoes because I'm addicted to potatoes.
There aren't any examples that can come off the top of my head. I know there are different municipalities, particularly in Nordic countries, that often have, strategies such as these, given that lawns, as they are currently, are not very ecologically productive and just are incredible sort of water guzzlers, fertilizer guzzlers, right? So if there's any opportunities to kind of turn them into productive landscapes that can help even with sort of hydrology of cities, right? That would be an advantage.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, my hand wasn't up quick enough.
Oh, those are good questions, but we'll move back to the motion. I've read it already. Councillor Palladino.
Sure. And thank you for that very informative presentation on civic common catalyzation. And I love that word, catalyzation, because it reminds me of my work at the county. We called it feedlot expansion back then. Only a few of us got that one. I will call the question.
Question's been called. All in favor? Excellent. Passes unanimously. So we move now along on the agenda to the last submission, which is a submission from Ms. Parker, Sustainability Manager, Partners for Climate Protection Update. We have the summary sheet and we have the PCP update report. Is there any questions on it before we move to the motion? I think it ties in beautifully with our first presentation. You sort of know which way we're going. It's for us to receive as information. It has the milestones that have been achieved and where we are heading. Everyone's fine then. Councillor Palladino, the motion is yours. Be it resolved that the Civic Works Standing Policy Committee recommend that Council receive for information the Partners for Climate Protection 2022 update report and direct administration to provide a report on progress to Civic Works Standing Policy Committee by December 2023. We are planning ahead. Councillor Palladino, question's been called. All in favor? Passes unanimously. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, it's a very good report. Lots of good information in there.